I think just about everybody anymore knows what an icon is. I think for quite a period of time, society kind of forgot what an icon is, represents, except maybe if you were part of the Greek Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox religions and such, because over there they don't talk about idols so much, they talk about icons. But with the advent of computers and computer systems, and particularly with the Apple system, you got these little pictures that show up on your computer screen. And used to, it was called point and shoot. You would take your mouse and you cover it, and then you hit one of the buttons and it'd open up a file or a whole program. And now it's just on the screen. You touch the screen on some of your iPads and the tablets that are around. It makes things a whole lot easier than that old system where you have to type in run and type in then the file name and everything, a whole bunch of string of letters and stuff, and you take 3 or 4 times to do it before you get it correct. It's like putting in people's email addresses now. Get them in there once, save them, and copy them over and paste them. Makes it a whole lot easier. But there you have that system of icons that have been developed, and each program has its own special icon so that you can go right to it on the computer and you hit that and you know what program is going to be opened up. You know what file is going to be opened up. It's so much easier because of the icons that are there. There are the little pictures you click to open a program or a file on a computer screen. But today we want to look at the original icon. The original icon. And that's Jesus. From Colossians chapter 1, verses 13 through 16, He, that's God, has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of His beloved Son, speaking of Jesus, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. He, Jesus, is the image, and in the Greek that's icon. He is the icon of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, for by Him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through Him, Jesus, as the eternal Word, and for Him as the Christ, the Anointed One, the one who is the head of the kingdom of heaven, the church of Christ. Now, God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God. And that's what makes us different from the animal world. Now, there are a lot of people out here that think that we evolved from monkeys. And I grant you that there are a lot of people in this world that if you look at them and look at their actions, watch how they behave, that you'd say, well, now they probably did evolve from monkeys. But no, not really. God created man in His own image, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. And that's what makes man, each and every individual, valuable, precious. We have a soul. Each individual has a soul. There's nobody in this world that we can look at and say, that person doesn't have a right to a relationship with God. That person's not good enough to be a child of God. Because each and every one is, because of that soul that God has placed within them. So God created mankind in that image, and if you look in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation, it's again that word icon, the icon of God. The designer behind all design is God. God designed this whole universe, and God designed each and every one of us. Everything in this universe is subject to the laws of the universe, and the laws that we would say the predecessor has put in place. Everything had a beginning. Everything had a start, except the original icon, except the one that started it all. Nothing of a material nature ever came into existence on its own. It's never happened other than one time that this came into existence because it was acted upon by an outside force. And if you go to Genesis chapter 1, you see that God spoke into nothing and everything appeared. We can't conceive in our minds of nothing, can we? Just try it for a little bit. Of nothing. And you see, there's got to be something. We cannot conceive of nothing. But see, that's coming from God, our Father, the one who created us. We have kind of a basic instinct, knowledge, understanding that says we can't conceive of nothing. So there had to be something there. Every observable object, every physical thing, every tangible bit of matter and energy owes its existence to something that existed before it did. We owe our existence to people who existed before we did. Our fathers and our mothers. But see, you trace it back far enough and you get back to the first man, even then you have to say there had to be someone there before that to make it all possible. Because this doesn't happen by accident. You know, they had a lot of tornadoes down in Oklahoma and a few in Texas, but you didn't see any of those where a tornado went through a junkyard and after it was over with, they were completely assembled automobiles ready to drive off of the lot. It just doesn't happen, does it? There has to be someone to design it. And there has to be an uncaused cause of things. We know that the universe is not eternal. How do we know that? Science tells us that, doesn't it? Science tells us through the laws of thermodynamics. That's just a big word that talks about how things are and how things exist in this world. Well, how do energy and matter interrelate, come together, the dynamics of it, the power of it, so that you can have the things that have. How is it that we all kind of stick together and we just don't discombobulate and fly all over the place? Well, we do when we die, right? Because then the body dissolves. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That's what happens to the body, see? But yet that body had to come together somehow. There had to be a cause for it. So everything has a beginning, had a beginning. Time had a point of origin. Because at some point in time, the beginning, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, time had to start. Because time couldn't come from some place where time already existed. When we talk about eternity, we're talking about something, someplace, whatever, that can't be measured. It simply cannot be measured, which is different than this universe. Everything in this universe can be measured in some way, shape, or form. We like to talk about people's height. We like to talk about people's weight. We like to talk about how long people live. We like to talk about how long the work week is. But can you imagine existing somewhere where time is just irrelevant? You just are. You just exist. No beginning, no end. You're just there. And that's what eternity is. And that's what heaven is about. Existing someplace that can't be measured with a being that cannot be measured. We cannot measure God. Scientists would love to measure God. Scientists try to measure God, don't they? But it's impossible to measure something or someone that simply cannot be measured because he's in a different realm of being, somewhere else. So time has a beginning. And listen, this is true. And if you're going to pay attention to anything in the sermon this morning, please pay attention right now so that I make sure that you hear this correctly. For the argument's sake, okay? For argument's sake, it does not matter whether you believe the earth is a few thousand years old or whether the earth is billions of years old. For the sake of argument, it does not matter because somewhere it had to have a beginning. And that's where you really got to focus your attention is on that, how did it have a beginning? Now, don't go out and say, Fred said it doesn't matter whether you believe that the earth is billions of years old. Now, that's not what I said. I said for argument's sake. Because whether it's billions of years old or whether it's thousands of years old, say, you still have to deal with how it got here. How it came to be. And it doesn't come to be without a designer, and it doesn't come to be without a cause. Somewhere there had to be an uncaused cause. And it's this uncaused cause who is the original icon. The original icon cannot be of this universe. We want to make God like us. The Bible says that. That's what people do. And even Israel thought that God was like them. And really what happens with people who believe that God is like us and that God thinks like we do and God acts like we do, the only thing they're doing is try to assert themselves as God over the God who created the universe. So He's not of this universe. This original icon cannot be of this universe, for then he would be of this universe, and it is impossible for anything in this universe to create itself. Impossible. So it had to have a creator. It had to have a cause. Unless it's an uncaused cause. It's someone who dwells in eternity, where there's no measurement. Someone who has always been, but creates something where there is time, where there is measurement, where there is life and death that goes with it. Though he can exist in this universe, the universe that he created, he's not of this universe. And that's what Jesus was telling the people when he came here. I'm not of this world. I came into this world. He created this world and he came into this world as a human being. He actually lowered himself, humbled himself to come into this universe that he created and be subject to its laws. Subject to the laws of gravity, subject to the laws of time, subject to the laws of physics, except when he did miracles. And the miracles and the signs that he did, the great wonders that he did, prove that he is not of this world. Because if he was of this world, he couldn't do those things. It would be impossible. So all this means he has and can exist totally separate from the laws of this universe. Jesus could, still does, exist separate from the laws of this universe because now he's in a different place. He died, he was buried, he was resurrected, he ascended to heaven. He went back to where he came from. The original icon now sits at the right hand of the throne of God to advocate for you and me. to speak to the Father on our behalf, when we give Him something to advocate for, when we actually, through Him, approach the Father to ask for forgiveness, when we trust in Him, and when we obey Him. Consider these facts. Again, we know that matter and energy cannot create themselves. Life does not spontaneously generate from non-life. Scientists would love to find that. Now, let me rephrase that. Atheistic scientists would love to find where life comes from non-life. Then they could say, you don't need God. But you know how long they've been searching for that? And they haven't found it yet. And I don't think they're going to find it. They won't find the source of life until they stand before God. Or maybe if they accept God before they leave this life. So, a third point, the structures within a living cell are too complex to be accounted for by evolutionary processes. How many of you have heard of Darwin's black box? Don't be shy. Hold your hand up. Never heard about Darwin's black box. You see, it's interesting. It's interesting to understand the arguments against Darwinism. The arguments for the Creator and against what the atheists would teach. Darwin's black box is like a mousetrap. You know what a mousetrap is. There's a mousetrap that God created that's pretty good. We call them cats, right? But then we have mousetrap. It has the trap, which is, I want to say scants. I forget the Greek word right offhand for it. But you got several different parts there. But until somebody designed that mousetrap and somebody put that mousetrap together, it was just pieces of wood and metal out here somewhere that nobody knew anything, didn't know what to do with it. Until somebody had some ingenuity and put it all together, now you've got a mousetrap. Listen, your human body is like that, and many parts of your human body are exactly like that. They couldn't come together through evolutionary processes. They had to be there at the time of the origin, when it was created, when it was brought into being. So if you get a chance, do some study on Darwin's black box and see if your faith isn't helped just a little bit. So whether we would want to admit it or not, we are the product of an intelligent designer. Because it took intelligence to make it all come together. And it took an uncaused cause to bring it all together. But see, that's nothing new, is it? Shouldn't be anything new for Christians. Psalm 139, verse 14. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, God. My soul knows it well. And if you let your soul do some thinking, if you let your soul do some meditating, if you let your soul do some studying, your soul will be benefited with a greater faith and understanding of what the original icon did to create this universe and to make us in His image. Now, the struggle of science is easy to resolve. Science has this problem. Science is trying to do something that science isn't designed to do. Okay? And if we understand that, then we say, oh, why am I listening to these scientists and all this stuff? Evelyn was talking about climate change before worship service. You know, all this stuff that comes out about climate change and all. And, you know, some people just take, well, the scientists say that there's climate change. You know, what does the evidence say? And people who don't look at the evidence and don't have enough intelligence to sort out the evidence, they kind of get the wrong impression about some things. But the struggle of science is easy to resolve. Science is the knowledge or a system of knowledge covering general truths or the operation of general laws, especially as obtained and tested through the scientific method. Now, that's not my definition. That's Merriam-Webster's definition of science. Well, what is the scientific method? Well, that's principles and procedures for the systematic pursuit of knowledge involving the recognition and formulation of a problem, the collection of data through observation and experiment, and the formulation and testing of hypotheses. In other words, it all works in that closed system that we were talking about. Scientists can't measure outside of that closed system. Scientists can't tell you what heaven's like because they can't test it. And they can't measure it. Scientists cannot tell you what your soul looks like because they can't measure it and they can't test it. God can tell you what your soul looks like. He can tell you whether it's laden with sin or whether it's pure snow, say. But that comes from a knowledge of God's Word. It doesn't come from scientific understanding. Science can only postulate on things that are observable or empirical, and that's what David Hume said, and a lot of people say, oh, David Hume must be right, because David Hume, you know, he was a pretty smart man back in his day. Never knew a man that was right in everything. Haven't met one. I'm not one. Are you one? I don't think so. Why would we believe that everything that exists is something, or are things that can be tested? Well, there can only be observed with the five senses. So when science speculates on creation, but they go further and they want to speculate on pre-creation. What was here before anything was here? And when they get into that, they've left the realm of science and they've gotten into the realm of philosophy, which has a whole different set of rules and laws and ways of understanding things. But see, some people don't understand that. Some people don't understand there are different laws between science and philosophy. So they accept what the science says. So they stop being science and they start being philosophers. Science can only function in the realm of the predictable and the repeatable. There's only been one creation of this universe. I know the communists would say that, oh, it's dialectical materialism. It gets down to nothing and gets down to nothing. Well, how can they know that? How can they know that? The only way that we can know what happened before creation, the only thing that we can know what happens outside of creation, if somebody there tells us about it. Somebody reveals it to us. So science has its greatest value in observing what is and evaluating the laws within the created universe in which we live. And listen, I don't doubt that helps make our lives a lot easier. You want to go back to the good old days before we had computers? Some people have never even accepted computers, you know. You want to go back before cell phones? You want to go back before telephones? Is that? And some people try to, but they borrow. Some scientists seek to peer beyond that which science says exists in this universe. And in this sense, they're like, some of you probably remember the old phrase about overspeeding your headlights. That's where you're going down the road so fast. Remember the old automobiles, they didn't have very good illumination on the headlights, and people would drive real fast, and they drive so fast after dark that by the time they saw something in their headlights, it was too late for them to stop. So they crash, and just kind of like overdriving their headlights. Think that science has ever overdriven their headlights? Well, here's the proof. Well, look at a science book today, and look at a science book from 100 years ago. And then look at the differences. Look at what science was saying 100 years ago and what science is saying now. And you see that they've changed in so many ways. What was it? Yeah, going back to the climate change. In the 1960s, we're headed for another ice age. It's global cooling. And that didn't happen, and now it's global warming. Watch out. Science is good where science is at its best, observing through the laws of what are. But when they get to interpreting those laws, then we find out that they find new discoveries all the time and rewrite the science books. Do you know the Bible's never had to be rewritten? Saw it on Facebook. The Bible doesn't need to be rewritten. It needs to be read. It needs to be studied. We need to understand who God is and what God would have us to do. So an analysis of the current world views. Where do we stand? Okay? And this is very simple, breaks down into two thoughts. Either we believe that the universe created itself, or we believe that an outside, uncaused cause, a ultimate designer, so to speak, created this universe. Either God created mankind, or mankind created God. I'm sorry, not God, gods. That's where, because if mankind creates a God, they're going to create multiple gods. And hey, you can go right back to Romans chapter 1, down starting what, about verse 19, down to the end of that chapter, and see, that's exactly what they did, wasn't it? When they didn't want to retain God in their minds, they created their own gods. Well, we either believe that that is true, that mankind created gods, or we believe that God created mankind. And it is that simple. If the truth is that God created us, then God has a claim on us morally, ethically, and spiritually. If the truth is that mankind created the gods, then we're simply without hope. And we're foolish for even being here this morning, if that's the case. We're to be, of all men, to be most pitied. And yet, the psalmist says in Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. The evidence is right there before us. So what's the warning? What's the message for us? It's what Paul gives us in Colossians chapter 2, verses 8 through 10. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. For in him, that's Christ, the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily, and you have been filled in him. If you're in him, you have been filled by him, who is the head of all rule and authority. You want to look at what mankind ought to look like? Look at the original icon. Look at Jesus. And that's what we're supposed to look like. He is who we're supposed to act like, because we have been created in his image. Now, if we don't think like him, if we don't act like him, then we're not of him. We're something different. We've become the world. We've become of the fallen world. Let's see. Look to God's revelation of himself in Christ Jesus to know how you should behave yourself. To see and understand how you should think about yourself. How you should think about your neighbors. How you should think about God. The very nature of your being is wrapped up in that original icon. If we want to know God, we must honor him and his revelation. Every other method or attempt of discovery leads to false gods and false religions. Follow Jesus, the original icon. And don't let anybody spoil you with vain deceit, with empty deceit, vain philosophies. Trust in Christ. The lesson is yours. If you're here this morning, you're subject to the invitation, whether it's repentance, baptism, remission of sins, whether it's an erring child of God returning to the fold. We give you that opportunity at this time as we stand and sing the invitation song. Let your request be made known. Come take a seat here in the front as we stand and sing.